Most people feel trapped by a rigid financial system that limits their choices, leaving them searching for ways to take back control of their time and wealth. When they look for solutions, many turn to the promise of decentralized cryptocurrency to build a truly independent future. In Freedom of Money, Binance founder Changpeng Zhao, CZ, reveals his unfiltered journey of risking everything, from selling his only apartment to buy Bitcoin to building the world's largest crypto exchange. Through explosive growth, grueling regulatory battles, and ultimately serving time in federal prison, he exposes the brutal reality and heavy responsibilities that come with disrupting global finance. Click to listen to this powerful memoir and discover the true price of financial freedom, straight from the man who changed the system forever. Let listen 10 secrets from Freedom of Money.
And it really is a fascinating playbook, right? I mean, we're setting out to extract 10 specific hard-won lessons from what is a deeply unfiltered text.
Yeah, absolutely. And whether you've been, holding digital assets for a decade or you're just insanely curious about the hidden mechanics of global finance, this deep dive is for you. It's fundamentally about navigating massive risk.
Right, scaling at light speed and surviving profound uncertainty. And the tone of this text, it's remarkably analytical, especially considering the extreme stress it documents.
It really is.
The underlying tension driving this entire narrative is the collision of two opposing forces, The raw cypherpunk ideal of total, unregulated financial freedom crashing head-on into the massive, real-world consequences of actually building the infrastructure required to secure billions of dollars for millions of people.
Which is a perfect segue into our first point, Secret 1. Embrace uncertainty as a superpower. To really wrap your head around how someone builds the largest crypto exchange on Earth, the text points us squarely at his childhood.
Yeah, the early years are super telling.
Right. I mean, we are looking at a kid who moved 12 times before his 12th birthday. In 1989, he relocated from Lianyong, China, which was this gritty industrial coal shipping hub, all the way to Vancouver.
What's fascinating here is the specific memory he chooses to highlight about that massive relocation.
Oh, the milk thing.
Exactly.
Okay,
it isn't a story about severe culture shock or, being overwhelmed by a new skyline. He distinctly remembers the literal taste of fresh, cold milk from a carton.
Wow.
He describes it as experiencing the taste of abundance for the first time. And later, he worked these early jobs flipping burgers at McDonald's, running the register at a gas station.
Just standard teenage jobs, right?
Yeah. But he discovered a profound sense of belonging in those roles because the work itself was entirely agnostic. The job didn't care about his accent or his background. It only cared if he showed up and executed the task.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because viewing instability as an asset is incredibly difficult for most people. I mean, he learned to build provisional structures in his life.
Right. He didn't find constant change exhausting.
Exactly. He found it liberating. I think about how you or I normally approach building our careers or our lives. We typically try to build, rigid concrete dams to hold back the floodwaters of change.
Because we want unshakable stability.
Yes, but a rigid concrete dam is prone to cracking.
Yeah.
It fails catastrophically under extreme pressure. He learned early on to build more of a dynamic levee system, or like a surfboard, right? You don't try to stop the waves, you learn to ride them.
That's a great analogy.
So to the listener out there, does your own deep discomfort with uncertainty hold you back from actually finding your footing?
Well, when you never stay in one location long enough to get perfectly comfortable, your psychological risk profile permanently changes. You learn to experiment, fail, and pivot rapidly because your entire identity isn't permanently anchored to a single physical place.
Right.
He was practicing extreme operational agility long before he ever learned how to write a line of code.
And that search for a universal underlying logic in a world of constantly shifting dialects naturally led him to mathematics. Which brings us to Secret 2. Master the skeleton of finance.
This is a huge misconception in the space.
Oh, for sure. There is a highly prevalent myth that early crypto pioneers were all, reckless cowboys trying to burn down traditional banking systems from their couches.
Right, but CZ was actually deeply embedded in the highly conservative, strictly regulated world of traditional finance.
Yeah, he spent his early career building the matching engine for the Tokyo Stock Exchange, which is just wild.
We need to pause and define what a matching engine actually is because it's literally the heart of global finance. In any major market, a matching engine is the core software algorithm that instantly pairs a buyer's order with a seller's order.
And it does this in fractions of a millisecond.
Exactly. If that software glitches or if it handles volume improperly, it can trigger a flash crash and wipe out billions of dollars of wealth instantly.
So no pressure.
Right? No pressure at all. He was completely immersed in what he calls the skeleton of finance, the underlying operational rules, the automated trading halts, and the strict price limits specifically engineered to prevent market failure.
I mean, I imagine working on that system required massive documentation for every single minor code change. It is an incredibly slow, cautious environment. It's like learning classical music before you're allowed to play jazz.
That's exactly what it is.
So how does spending years in a hyper-regulated, cautious system actually give someone an operational edge when they finally jump into the completely unregulated, chaotic Wild West of early cryptocurrency?
Because he understood the fundamental mechanics of why financial constraints exist. They aren't just, bureaucratic red tape. They exist to prevent systemic wealth destruction.
Right.
Because he knew the traditional rules intimately, he didn't look at early cryptocurrency as just magic internet money meant for speculation. He recognized it as a massive, complex engineering puzzle that would eventually require an entirely new set of digital rules to function safely at a global scale.
And knowing that skeleton allowed him to spot a true paradigm shift the moment he saw one. Moving on to Secret 3. Bet on conviction, not hype. The text details a pivotal poker game in 2013 where he is first introduced to the concept of Bitcoin.
A literal poker game.
Yeah, and by 2014, he takes a leap of faith that most people would find utterly terrifying. He literally sells his only apartment in Shanghai to buy Bitcoin at roughly $600 a coin.
And we should note, the immediate aftermath of that trade was a brutal, sustained market crash.
Oh, yeah?
The psychological pressure of watching the entirety of your physical net worth seemingly evaporate overnight, that is a pressure that breaks most investors.
Here's where it gets really interesting. How do you tell the difference between true, unshakable conviction and just stubborn FOMO? The fear of missing out.
It's a fine line for a lot of people.
I would be sweating, checking the price chart every 5 minutes. But his deliberate coping mechanism was refusing to check the daily price action. He forced his attention entirely onto the underlying technology.
He didn't panic.
Right, because his bet was never on a quick speculative bubble. His bet was on the blockchain's fundamental ability to create digital scarcity without requiring a central authority.
Which was revolutionary at the time.
Let's clarify digital scarcity for a second. Before blockchain, if you had a digital file like an MP3 or a photograph, you could endlessly copy and paste it. Bitcoin introduced a system where if I send you a digital asset, the decentralized network mathematically verifies that I no longer possess it.
Right. And conviction of that magnitude does not come from reading a Reddit thread that tells you to hold,
Yeah.
His resilience came from months of rigorous, isolated technical study.
He did the homework.
He read the dense white papers, he analyzed the open source code, and he understood the mathematical proofs holding the network together. When you deeply understand the architecture of a technology, severe short-term price volatility doesn't shake your core thesis.
And selling that physical apartment wasn't just a successful long-term trade. It sparked an entire philosophy for how he operates in the world. Secret 4. Build optionality over illiquid assets.
Yes, the chapter called I Don't Buy Houses.
Yeah, he literally hasn't owned physical property since that 2014 sale. He describes liquidity not just as a financial metric, but as a psychological state.
Because private cryptographic keys are completely weightless.
Exactly. You can memorize a seed phrase in your head and cross international borders. Real estate, conversely, anchors you heavily to a specific legal jurisdiction. It exposes you to sudden local policy changes, and it demands constant physical maintenance.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this philosophy is the ultimate culmination of his childhood rootlessness. He is actively optimizing for optionality.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning he prioritizes the absolute freedom to exit any situation or jurisdiction with minimal friction. He is choosing maximum agility rather than maximizing traditional net worth through heavy, illiquid assets.
I genuinely have to push back on this mindset, though, because it is incredibly easy to claim private keys are weightless when you are a billionaire with endless resources capable of living in five-star hotels indefinitely.
That's a fair point.
For the vast majority of you listening, real estate is the ultimate safety net. A paid-off house guarantees that your family will not end up on the street if you lose your primary source of income.
True.
It prompts us to deeply question what security actually means to us. Is true security found by being deeply, physically anchored to one piece of land? Or is it having the total, frictionless agility to pivot your entire life instantly when a global crisis hits?
It is a vital critique. The psychological reality for the average person relies heavily on physical collateral. But if you are operating as a completely rootless global digital entity, physical anchors are severe liabilities.
Right.
And when you have no physical collateral in the real world, the only actual anchor keeping your business alive is the trust of your users.
Which flows perfectly into Secret 5.
Okay.
Make users first your ultimate profit strategy. Users first became the defining operational slogan of the Binance.
But the memoir frames this distinctly. It wasn't standard marketing fluff. It was a rigorous, self-imposed constraint.
Because explosive growth that lacks underlying trust is incredibly fragile. The text emphasizes that users who flock to a platform purely to harvest flashy promotional rewards will abandon that platform the exact second the promotions stop.
Exactly. But users who genuinely trust that their funds are secure will remain loyal even through severe market downturns.
And the memoir details multiple specific instances where the exchange had to eat massive financial costs to protect user funds, intentionally prioritizing security over optimizing their own short-term revenue.
Right, because aligning your self-interest directly with ethical behavior is the only thing that makes a business model sustainable across multiple decades.
Think about a local restaurant owner. If they design their menu strictly based on which frozen ingredients yield the highest absolute profit margin, the food quality plummets and customers eventually stop walking through the door.
Yeah, they catch on.
But if they design the menu based on providing a meal that makes the customer genuinely want to return every single week, long-term profit becomes the natural byproduct of that trust.
Prioritizing user trust sounds simple conceptually, but it becomes nearly impossible logistically when your platform is experiencing user growth faster than almost any commercial entity in recorded history.
Oh yeah, which takes us to Secret 6. Speed needs restraint. Let's look at the explosive 2017 crypto bull market.
That was a crazy time.
Insane. Binance was scaling so aggressively that CZ described the sheer volume of work as having no daytime. The entire engineering team was just working around the clock in a constant state of reaction.
And he is remarkably vulnerable in the text regarding this specific era, admitting he developed a dangerous arrogance. He confused correlation with causation.
Meaning he thought they were just that good.
Exactly. He started believing his internal team were absolute geniuses when in reality, the entire crypto industry was simply being lifted by a massive macroeconomic updraft. He eventually realized that sheer speed, left unchecked, destroys infrastructure.
So what does this all mean operationally? They had to force deliberate pauses. They had to stop and clarify exactly who owned what specific tasks.
Right.
They began strictly separating reversible, low-stakes experiments from irreversible, permanent code commitments. They had to actively protect their engineers' focused execution time from the endless, reactive churn of user demands.
This dynamic is a textbook example of the innovator's dilemma. What is notable is how they chose to address it. They launched Binance Chain and their own decentralized exchange, the DX.
They disrupted themselves.
They consciously chose to self-disrupt their own centralized model. Healthy restraint means having the discipline to deliberately slow down your primary revenue driver in order to build parallel, safer, decentralized infrastructure, rather than blindly scaling a centralized platform until it physically breaks under user load.
It is exactly like engineering a supercar. If you upgrade the engine block to output 1,000 horsepower, but you completely neglect to upgrade the braking system, you are inevitably going to wrap that car around a tree.
Exactly.
You have to build stopping power that perfectly matches your rate of acceleration.
And the ultimate braking system in the world of high-speed global finance is a massive, undeniable, mathematically verifiable safety net.
Secret 7. Trust and security are assets worth paying for. In 2018, they established SciFU, the Secure Asset Fund for Users. The name itself is actually a nod to a viral YouTube meme created by someone named Bizanacci, Funds or SciFu.
Yeah, the meme was funny, but the financial mechanics behind the meme were deadly serious.
Totally. The exchange committed to taking 10% of all trading fees generated and locking them in a transparent cold wallet. They eventually established an $800 million floor for this fund, denominated in Bitcoin.
We should quickly clarify the mechanics of a cold wallet for those who might not know.
Yeah, please do.
It is not just a password-protected digital account. A cold wallet is physical hardware that is completely physically severed from the internet. A hacker cannot remotely access or drain it because there is literally no network connection to exploit.
They realize that security isn't just a PR campaign you scramble to launch after a catastrophic hack. It has to be a daily, uncompromising operational discipline. When you hold billions of dollars of other people's money, security is a moral obligation.
Absolutely.
Imagine if your traditional neighborhood bank took 10% of its total operational profits, converted it to solid gold bars, and placed it in a transparent glass vault right in the main lobby, just to definitively prove they could cover your deposits if a crisis hit.
That would be wild.
Right. Why is it that the supposedly unregulated crypto world had to invent this extreme level of visible accountability?
Because without a lender of last resort, like a traditional central bank that can simply print more fiat currency to bail out a failing commercial bank, the crypto ecosystem relies entirely on verifiable reserves.
Exactly.
If you cannot mathematically prove you hold the assets, sheer market panic will trigger a bank run that destroys your institution in a matter of hours.
And we saw exactly what happens when institutions cannot prove their reserves. This brings us to secret 8. Don't worship scale or relationships, worship reality.
Yeah, this is a heavy one.
Despite the transparent safety nets some platforms were building, much of the wider industry was constructing a massive house of cards. This fragility led directly to the brutal 2022 crypto winter.
Maintaining strict neutrality regarding the various regulatory and legal battles across the industry here, we're just looking at the mechanics. The text meticulously details the rapid cascading collapses of Terra, Celsius, Three Arrows Capital, and ultimately the FTX exchange.
And the lessons extracted from this systemic wreckage are profound. First, scale does not equal safety.
Right. In traditional enterprise tech, massive scale often provides a defensive moat. In finance, sheer scale frequently hides extreme operational fragility and masks dangerous amounts of leverage.
Let's define exactly what that leverage looked like. Artificial yield was rampant. Platforms were heavily advertising 15% or 20% guaranteed returns to retail customers.
Which is unsustainable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they weren't generating those returns from actual business profits. They were often using newly deposited customer funds to pay off the yields owed to older customers, or they were making wildly risky interconnected loans behind closed doors.
And the second core lesson from all this is to never worship relationships over reality.
Yeah, the FTX situation.
Right. The memoir details how the FTX exchange and its trading firm counterpart, Alameda Research, shared completely imaginary firewalls. They commingled user funds, shared executive leadership, and treated basic regulatory compliance as a completely optional suggestion.
Contrast that with Binance. They maintained a deliberately simple operational model. They charged transparent exchange fees for trading, and they explicitly did not lend out customer funds to generate artificial yield.
The psychological trap driving this is powerful, though. We are biologically hardwired to trust massive, wealthy institutions.
Oh, absolutely. If a company boasts of fancy glass headquarters, purchases stadium naming rights, and has a famous CEO constantly featured on magazine covers, our brains automatically assume our deposits are safe.
It's human nature.
But CZ's experience and the 2022 contagion proves that complexity and deep interconnectedness are the absolute enemies of systemic resilience.
This raises an important question, though, regarding the limits of decentralization. When one heavily leveraged, intertwined firm failed, it triggered a systemic liquidity crisis that dragged down almost everyone exposed to them.
Yeah, a massive domino effect.
It forces us to ask if decentralized finance can ever truly replace central banks or stabilize without a centralized authority willing to absorb catastrophic losses during a panic.
It's a tough question. And if you strip away the massive scale, the media hype cycles, and the toxic interconnected relationships, what is actually left to build a durable, lasting company?
The answer is incredibly unglamorous.
Which leads to Secret 9. Long-termism requires boredom. CZ argues that true structural durability is built entirely in the uncelebrated hours.
The broader cryptocurrency industry is notoriously addicted to novelty. I mean, everyone is constantly chasing the newest shiny token, the next massive airdrop, or the latest disruptive protocol.
Always looking for the next big thing.
Right. But surviving across multiple market cycles means fully embracing the intense, grinding boredom of endless compliance paperwork, repetitive security code reviews, and aggressively consistent leadership messaging.
The text highlights the absolute necessity of treating mandatory maintenance windows not as optional inconveniences, but as deeply strategic imperatives.
Yeah, that discipline is rare.
It is about establishing hard budgets that strictly protect foundational infrastructure work from narrative drift. meaning you refuse to let your engineering team get distracted by whatever narrative the media is hyping this week.
It requires a massive suspension of ego. You have to be willing to do the tedious, completely invisible work that no one will ever applaud you for, simply because it keeps the underlying system structurally sound.
I think about this in terms of physical fitness. It is the exact difference between the guy who goes to the gym once a month, loads up way too much weight, and posts his chaotic 1-rep max on Instagram for validation.
Versus the guy who just shows up every day.
Exactly. Versus the person who quietly stretches and does basic mobility work for 20 minutes in their living room every single morning for 10 years. If you want to build something genuinely lasting in your own life, your investments, or your career, you have to learn to genuinely love the boring reps.
And that intense focus on building something lasting brings us to the final and undoubtedly most poignant reflection in the text.
Yes. Secret 10. True freedom is time, attention, and boundaries. Let's just take a breath here. CZ spent his entire adult life building a massive global machine designed to dramatically increase the freedom of money for millions of people worldwide. But in the end, he temporarily lost his own physical freedom.
Right. And again, maintaining strict impartiality regarding the legal proceedings. The sources outline the objective facts of his settlement with the U.S. Department of Justice.
Right, just looking at the facts.
He officially resigned as CEO, entered a guilty plea for violating the Bank Secrecy Act, paid a $50 million personal fine, and served a 4-month federal prison sentence. He explicitly admitted to prioritizing rapid user growth over establishing an adequate anti-money laundering compliance program during the exchange's hyper-growth phase.
And in his final reflections, navigating the immense fallout of those decisions, he reaches a profound realization. The technical freedom of money is not the ultimate freedom. Real freedom is the freedom of time.
Time is everything.
It is the freedom of attention. The elusive ability to focus deeply on one single thing without constant frantic pinging distractions. And crucially, it is the freedom of boundaries, having the ultimate unshakable power to simply say no to the endless demands on your life.
The irony embedded in his life's journey is just staggering. Here's a man who lived out of a suitcase for years, who famously refused to buy a house specifically to maintain total global optionality and avoid being tied down by physical anchors.
Good.
Yet he ultimately realized that true freedom is actually found by intentionally imposing your own boundaries. It is about actively accepting human constraints rather than trying to infinitely escape them through technology or massive wealth accumulation.
You listening right now might be hustling incredibly hard for financial independence. You might be grinding out 80-hour work weeks, skipping family events, and constantly checking your phone to monitor the markets.
We all fall into that trap.
But are you actively sacrificing your time, your focused attention, and your personal boundaries just to hit an arbitrary number in your bank account? Because if you are, you might not be building financial freedom at all. You might just be building your own customized prison.
The text leaves us with a critical thought to navigate our own ambitions. Freedom is not the absence of constraint. It is the intelligent navigation of constraint.
That's a powerful way to put it.
If you set out to build revolutionary infrastructure or disrupt an entire global industry, but you do it without fully, deeply considering the local human consequences of that technology, you will eventually pay the price. The real cost of disrupting the world isn't just financial. It is the incredibly heavy, inescapable burden of accountability.
Thank you for watching. Please like it, share, subscribe, follow up in the next video.